Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest recording of The Independent Activist here with me, Fra Hughes in Belfast, and Dr Declan Hayes in Dublin. Dr Hayes is a retired professor of finance based in Dublin. Now, what we're going to be talking about today in conversation is Syria. So, I suppose to find out what's happening in Syria today, we really have to go back a wee bit in time, not too far historically. So, Declan, I'd like to welcome you to the program. I'm very honoured to have you here. I'd like to
Okay.
ask, I'd like to ask you, buddy. In 2011, we're led to believe there was a people-led revolution against the dictatorship in Damascus and Dr. Bashar al-Assad. Do you want to tell us, in your opinion, maybe what led to the uprising in 2011? I'll bring us up to date to what's happening today.
Well, let's just say I first got to Syria at Easter 2014, when the Greek and Latin or Roman Catholic Easters were on the same day, April the 20th, as they are now. So I was the first foreigner into Maaloula, which is an ancient Christian town where they speak Aramaic, the language that Jesus spoke. I was also with the Armenians up in Kasab, and I was there for the presidential election some months later in 2014, when I saw people queuing up to vote for Assad at 6 o'clock in the morning. I was in Homs, where the whole civil society was on the side of Assad, the equivalent of the GAA and the soccer and so on here. He had all of them uh, on his side. Now, there's two things that have happened since before that, the alleged gas attack, and right up to this very day, is that number one, the massacres are continuing. That's number one. But so too are the lies, because for whatever reason, there's a whole pile of vested interests in Ireland, as well as elsewhere, who have a dog in the fight. They have backed Jolani and his head hackers and those behind them, and they're so far in that they can't back out. Now, the massacres over the last few months, especially in the coastal areas of Latakia and Tartus, as well as Hama and Homs, show that we have been right in everything we said, everything. And they have been lying through their teeth all along. If you read the Irish Times, and God help you if you ever have to read that rag of a paper, um, they blamed the ongoing massacres today on remnants of Assad and members of Assad's cult. Assad is not a cult leader. He's a member of a small minority Alawite tribe, and this has nothing to do with him. The call from the very beginning was Alawites to the grave and Christians to Beirut, or as it happens now, in the grave. So the Irish Times, the BBC, etc., have been lying all along. And just go back to Maaloula in 2014, which is when the Syrian army, with their Lebanese irregular allies, freed the Kalamu Mountains and Maaloula. On that Easter Sunday, only a few hours after President Assad had walked through Maaloula, I walked through the same wrecked churches, the same wrecked monasteries, the same wrecked towns with all the leaders of the Christian churches in Syria. And I I was in those churches where everything was broken, where the icons were either robbed or destroyed, and the Daily Telegraph, the BBC, and so on lied about that it was some kind of an Assad propaganda coup. It was nothing of the sort. In that church, I was, well, according to them, the soldiers with me were Sunnis. That's what they said. I'm a Sunni soldier, and here I am in the church risking my life, and the people in the West have washed their hands off all Syrians, and that washing of the hands continues to this day.
Yeah, I followed in your footsteps. I was in Maaloula in either 2017 or 2019. I went up through the village hill. I went up to where the hotel that ISIS and Al Nusra Front, I believe at the time, had occupied, and it was all burnt out and shelled. And then I was down in the. It's a very holy site. People travel from all over the Middle East and further afield to Maaloula to visit that Christian church that's down the steps where the icons had been destroyed and stuff. So, we've witnessed the fall of Syria. So, if we look at it now, we've got Israel occupying a third of it. We've got Turkey occupying, basically, Turkey and the Americans, stroke the Kurds, another third, and HTS in the middle with Giuliani. Do you have any real knowledge of Giuliani's history? People talk that he was part of Al Qaeda and that they're financed potentially by Saudi Arabia and others, and he's been feted all over the West and all over West Asia. He's been welcomed in as a liberating president for the people of Syria, when in fact, if there is such a thing as a cult in Syria, it'll be HTS, it'll be Al Qaeda, it'll be ISIS, it'll be these people that are murdering the Alawites and the Christians and any Shia that basically puts their head above the parapet.
Well, I got a message this morning that they've taken 20,000 dead bodies up to Idlib to put into one of their mass graves. Right now, the evidence is all over the internet as regards how they're trying to cover all this up. The evidence is there, throwing people into pits and burying them at sea and all the rest. For those who want to know, for the minority of people who want to know, Giuliani's history is reasonably well known, and there's nothing exceptional about it. He was a prisoner of the Americans who most likely turned him,
Mm-hmm.
and then he, it was his group who destroyed Maaloula and kidnapped the nuns and so on, and the Qataris acting as middlemen. What is quite obvious today, this is after the fact, is that he is not the captain of the ship, right? He has not thrown as much as a cabbage leaf against the Israelis who occupy something like a third of the country now, right? He's obviously in hock with the Turks and has been all along. Now, if we deduce from that that he was not the captain of the ship ever, the question arises, who was the captain of this ship? And we look back to those massive ISIS convoys of Toyota pickup trucks, right? Uh, they were as strong as a medium army from any medium-sized country in the world. So who funded all of that, and who enabled it? And we come back to the suspects: Israel, Turkey, the United States of America. The evidence is overwhelming, right? Now, all the West has going for it is lies, and very bad lies at that. This Giuliani fellow, he's obviously not a leader. He's not Charles de Gaulle or somebody, or he doesn't have the civil society networks that Assad had. He's not a Saddam Hussein type figure, who wouldn't suffer fools too gladly. So how is he the leader? And the obvious answer is that others have put him there. And we see this replicated in the West, where Western leaders are straw men, whether it's Dublin or London. These people are not cut in the form of any leader. So the question is, who is controlling them? And the three major suspects, after the fact, looking at the evidence and looking at everything that went before, is Israel, the United States, and Turkey. And all these Western choir boys, and there's so many of them, and Western politicians, they have a case to answer. They are as culpable as are Giuliani's cutthroats.
Yeah, I met President Assad twice. I've been in Syria 5 times in total. I went through in a convoy in 2010 before this all kicked off, but also again in 2014. And in one of those meetings that he had with the people that were on the convoy going to Palestine with medical aid relief, he told us that the Americans had told him basically that he must accept normalization. This is my paraphrasing of what he said with Israel, or there would be serious consequences. And obviously, the serious consequences became the war on Syria. I mean, there's statistics out there that claim up to 50% of these people who claim to be fighting in the Syrian rebellion, in inverted commas, weren't even Syrian. They're the Uyghurs, they're the Turkestans, they're Turkish, they're from everywhere, including the Muslim Brotherhood and some. And like Hamas left Damascus when this all kicked off because they're part of the Muslim Brotherhood, in my opinion, and yet there was still a Palestine brigade within the Syrian Arab army that fought to protect the Syrian Arab Republic. So it was a war on Syria because Syria was one of the members of the Axis of Resistance and the bulwark against Israel. So with the fall of Syria, what do you think is going to happen going forward? Are we going to see more balkanization, more sectarianism, more massacres, more deaths? And is there a possibility that Turkey and Israel, who are not actually they're not combatants against each other. You think they're going to carve the country up into two? They're talking about a Druze state connected with
Well,
Israel, and possibly an Alawite state connected with Israel.
well, first of all, the macro comes from the micro. You know, it's nice to look at the world and how tectonic plates. But if you go back to the micro, uh, I was in Yarmouk camp when it was being shelled, right, just after the Syrian army had liberated it, right? Now, as people in Belfast, North Belfast, would well know, if there's a gang of blokes with, armed to the teeth running around, you are not going to argue too much with them. And Yarmouk camp was wrongly and dishonestly used by these same quislings in the West as a stick to beat the Syrian government with. The only help they got was from the Syrian government, and life was hard for them. These Uyghurs and so on, the Uyghurs are the worst of the lot. And what's interesting about the Uyghurs, we're all supposed to, be crying over the bad time they allegedly get in China. And there's nothing about the thousands of people they've slaughtered in um, Syria. Right. Now, Erdogan brought these pan Turkic people, I was going to use a stronger word, from Central Asia, from China, over as proxies who raped and robbed everything in front of them. And if that's happening, the only thing you can do is get out before they get you and your family. Now, cui bono, who benefits? Well, Erdogan's game is to build this pan-Turkic empire. He sees himself as a new sultan. His economy is in pieces. As regards mouthing off about Israel, he allows the Azeris supply Israel with oil. Again, he is not going to rock the boat. Israel, I was in the West Bank and I remember somebody telling me, I look at the next Easter, but the Israelis plan for Easter 50 years in the future, right? So they have their Greater Israel plan. It's working a charm in uh, Syria. They're behind the defenses of Hezbollah now. However, that'll go. We'll have to wait and see. But Israel has to be very happy with the situation because people like me, not me, people like me who look at the Druze and the Alawites, the first thing is you have to survive, right? It's no good going down with the ship if everybody goes down with the ship. So the Alawites and the Druze need protection. The Alawites are a pretty obvious case, but with the Druze, the Druze generally go with whoever is the big boy on the block because they're an inward looking community and they don't like to marry outside or anything like that. That's okay. That's their choice, right? But excuse me, the Druze of the Golan of the occupied Golan Heights and of southern Lebanon, of southern Syria, were very, very, very pro-Syrian government, and they produce some of the most capable and ablest generals in the Syrian army, right? Now, the Druze are squaring up again to fight for the Druze, which is understandable, but they can't really carry the day unless other people row in behind them. The Alawites, stupidly perhaps, surrendered all their weapons, and these characters are going door to door slaughtering them. Now, the cry is from people like me, but obviously from more influential people like me than me that we've seen in France and other places. Oh, we have to save the Alawites. We have to save the Christians. We can come on to the Christians in a second because I don't think there's been such hypocrisy since Adam and Eve were running around the Garden of Eden as how these people have been betrayed time and time again. And we have to protect all the minorities. We all agree with that, but under what circumstances? See, I believe that Syrian people, Irish people, the people of Guatemala, wherever, should be sovereign and free. Right? They shouldn't be having to look over their shoulders and, pray that themselves and their families won't get massacred today or tomorrow. But that's the freedom we're talking about now. They've got all these henchmen from Chechens and Tajiks and Irish and everywhere else, something like 50,000 from Western Europe, right? Dead. And they're told, well, if you want something, rob it, right? If you want a woman, either rape her or turn her into a sex slave. That's happening today, just like it happened to the Yazidi. Now, if you're an American imperialist or an Israeli imperialist, you can't make an omelette without cracking eggs, okay? And this stuff of rape and so on, it's not new. It happened in the Nakba. They're on videos boasting about it, right? Okay. So this is a continuation to this greater good, which will be a greater Israel, a greater Turkey, and everybody else knows their place unless they want to be pushing up daisies. That's where we are.
Yeah, it's very sad that human life seems to have so little leverage and so little kind of worth in an imperialist, capitalist, colonialist world, where they just want to displace and replace people. There's been some, I'll call it trouble skirmishes on the Syrian Lebanese border. So, any idea what's going on there? Is it HTS? Is it Julani trying to not open a front against the Hezbollah and the tribal clans that live in that part of southern Lebanon? But do you foresee a future where HTS is almost used as an arm, an extension of Israeli foreign policy in the region by putting pressure on the Lebanese resistance at the border at a time when Israel is continuing to bomb people at will and continue to illegally occupy the Sheba farms and also these 5 hilltops and villages that they couldn't take during their war on Lebanon but have successfully held during the peace talks?
Well, it has to be said that Israel scored a major victory with the dismemberment of Syria. That's a fact, whether people like it or not. Right now, what Hezbollah are doing, slightly different from Iran and Yemen, is they're digging in and they're getting ready for what lies ahead, which is not going to be pleasant. Uh, the Israelis have captured Mount Carmel and so on. They're at the outskirts of
Yes.
Damascus. They're in the Kalamoon Hills and places like that, and they have uncovered a lot of Hezbollah's heavy gear. Right now, unfortunately for Israel, Hezbollah have this eschatological worldview. They're quite willing to die, and probably more importantly, from Israel's point of view, they're quite willing to bring a lot of Israelis into the next world with them. Right now, leaving that to one side, the way southern Lebanon is now is they have no other option but to fight. Right. But they will do significant damage. They'll suffer an awful lot of damage, and Iran will have to decide where it goes after that if it wants to join in the punch up. But from a Western, well, from a Western humanitarian or whatever point of view, I'm not saying the West are humanitarians. They're whatever the opposite of humanitarian is. Um, what's all this fighting for? Why have hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, in Syria, in Palestine, in Lebanon lost their lives? What's the reason for it, right? Now, the history books will tell us eventually, when we're long gone, that it's to build a greater Israel and a greater Turkey, just like the Eastern Front in the Second World War was to build a greater Third Reich, right? Now, besides everything else, that is totally amoral, right? So Hezbollah, etc., will fight. They're given no choice. But to me, the major problem that concerns us is the silence in the West. People go on about Hitler's willing executioners, the people who never spoke up and who just saw the cattle trains heading to Auschwitz and so on. That's going on to this very day, and it predates October the 7th, right? We just read, yeah, another few airstrikes on Gaza, another few airstrikes on South Lebanon, another few airstrikes on Syria or wherever else comes into their mind. So, what's the common denominator? One of the major common denominators is Israel. They don't seem to get on with anybody in the whole neighborhood. So, where do we look to see where the problems are? The problem has to be Israel and the bigger plans Israel fits into.
Yeah, I agree. I've always kind of described the Zionist entity as a cancer within the body politics of West Asia. And like any cancer, if it's not cut out or treated, it could potentially kill the host. I mean, I would nearly put every death in West Asia at the hands of the Israelis. If Israel didn't exist, you wouldn't have had the Nakba, you wouldn't have had 67, you wouldn't have had 73, 74, you wouldn't have had 6 wars on Gaza since the people in Gaza voted for Hamas as their democratically elected government in 2006, 2007.
Who
So,
are they supposed to? Who are they supposed to vote for? The Likud party, right? Now, as I see it, the problem is in the West. We're going on about the Israelis and the Palestinians, and in my case, more so the Syrians. But people are standing idly by, and I know Israel is a hard nut to crack, right? But I believe that a lot of the supposed pro-Israeli, pro-Palestinian operatives in the West who are in with the Muslim Brotherhood and various other groups in Ireland and everywhere else act against the interests of the Palestinians and against the interest of peace. That's my firm belief, right? Um, if you're going to march, and I've marched and I've broken the law on many occasions in times gone by on doing the right thing as I saw it. Uh, what is their game? What do they hope to achieve? Everybody seems to be pro-Palestinian, but I don't see any change in the power structures between those giving the punishment and those getting the punishment. As regards Hamas, I've I don't support the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm quite against the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm quite against Hamas's involvement in Syria. So therefore, I have a big issue with Hamas, right? But the people supporting those getting massacred in Gaza are supporting them mainly, I would contend, because they believe the people of Gaza, like everywhere else, have basic human rights. That might seem like the obvious to you, but it's the polar opposite of what Israel, and the next part is underlined. There are very many supporters in Ireland and elsewhere in the West do not accept.
Yeah, I agree with you, definitely. I mean, I've no time for the Muslim Brotherhood. The only thing I would maybe bring to the table is I remember when Morsi was elected in Egypt. I mean, that was, uh, I presume, an opening for election. He was a member leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. He was elected and put in, and then he seemed to make some changes in and around the border at Gaza. I know for a fact Palestinians were able to almost move freely between Gaza and Alawites because I'd been there. I'd met some of them, I'd spoken to them. But then along come the Americans, and then out goes Morsi, and then comes Sisi. And I remember Sisi standing on the steps of the presidential palace about 4 days after the coup, and he called out publicly, he says, "Why aren't the Americans coming out publicly to support me?" They put him there, I assume, with the help of Mossad and others. And he called them out when they didn't come out publicly to support him. And 2 days later, the State Department says de facto, we recognize President Sisi as the new leader in Egypt. So Muslim Brotherhood in the democratic kind of process get somebody elected, and I don't know if it's a year or 2 months later,
Well,
you have a
again,
coup, and he died in prison then.
the first thing Morsi did was slaughter the cops, and he was going to
That's
invade Syria. Right now, it's a complicated area. The Middle East is, and a lot of it is made deliberately complicated by our friends on the next island who set up the Muslim Brotherhood in the first place, and who have a nefarious history in Palestine of slaughtering Palestinians, Wingate and people like that, who are regarded as national heroes in Israel. But the bottom line is people deserve respect and deserve to be heard, right? And their their point of view heard. The Israelis have kept a constant narrative over the last 100 years since Herzl and so on were running around, and they stick to that, and so do their allies. The Palestine. I'm not going to paint any rosy picture of the Palestinians, but the likes of Bethlehem was a quiet little town, minding their own business essentially, until these characters roared into town in the 1930s and started slaughtering all around them. Right now, um, it's like a sleepy little Polish village, and the next time the Waffen SS are coming in to visit you. That's exactly what it's like, right? And we could argue this till the cows come home, but my big problem is that the West is totally dishonest in all of this. Israel is not going to change unless it's made change. And we have not just Trump bombing Yemeni celebrating Eid, not just that, but we have a whole Western apparatus that's quite happy with what's going on there, right? And if that's the way, if people think the Third Reich or the Fourth Reich is the way to go, fair enough. But they do not hold the moral high ground, even though they pretend to hold the moral high ground. So what's needed? If we're to say the glass is half full over Syria, what Syria has in recent months, it has exposed these people for the charlatans that they are. You cannot support a genocide on the Alawites and Christians in Latakia and Tartus and pretend that you have any human sensibilities at all. And similarly, with what goes on in Gaza, where they admit it, it's not my words, they shoot them for sport, and they have been shooting them for sport since long before October the 7th. So if there's to be a way out of this morass, the West has to get some kind of a moral balance as well. To take another case from Palestine, when Israel, those the Pinocchio country of Israel, when it said, Hamas are up to their eyeballs in the UNRWA, the uh, relief organization, they immediately suspended the West, the United States, Britain, the Netherlands, etc. immediately suspended all human aid to UNRWA, right? Meaning that kids were going without um, food, etc. Now, obviously, Hamas had a lot of members over there, so and some of them had jobs, obviously. And if the only job in town is to get a job with you know, the likes of UNRWA, obviously a few of them might be in there. But Israel has lied again and again, which is its right, okay, because that's what it does. But the West is quite happy to play along with those lies and use Israeli lies for their own war crimes against the Palestinians and against others in that general region.
Well, you get no argument from me on that. We're nearly up on time, so just going to ask you one last question, Declan. I mean, you've touched upon the West, and you've touched upon how it's like covered politically and financially and militarily, come to the aid of Israel over and over and over again. And we know after the First World War, Sykes-Picot, when they divided up the whole of West Asia, created countries that didn't exist, put in monarchies that hadn't previously existed, and then France and Britain under what was it called, under the mandate. There was a mandate in Palestine, but there was also the areas of influence. So Britain and France, being two imperialist European nations, militarily occupied most of West Asia after the First World War. And it was only after national wars of independence that they were forced to leave. So, in your opinion, why does the West support Israel? And is it a form of not recolonization, but is it on behalf of corporations like in Iran in 52 when they got rid of Mossadegh, 52, 53? That was because of Anglo Dutch oil and BP. The British got the Americans to go in to bring in the Shah because Mossadegh had nationalized the Iranian oil industry. So is it a continuation of imperialist corporate greed in West Asia that they want? Is this why they're supporting Israel? And is this why we're watching these deaths and murders and slaughters unfolding all over the region?
Well, Israel, as you know, was originally called the Ulster of the Middle East
Yeah.
because a gang of Poles and Belarusians and Ukrainians were plonked in the middle of it with a sob story going right back to the early 1900s. Um, and that has been that's America's unsinkable, well, so far unsinkable aircraft carrier over there. If you look at some of the other characters in the Gulf state, they have more spare money than China has. You know, add them all up: Saudi Arabia, um, Qatar, etc., etc. Right, more money than God. You mentioned Iran and 52. If you go back to the 19th century in Persia, when they first moved in to take the oil, they didn't even they weren't even going to leave the Persians with the pips of the orange. It was so extreme that they had to back down on it. So one of the big cards America has going for it is it uses Israel and that whole Gulf state gang of lepers to control the entire area. Why,
Mhm.
for example, should the oil of Saudi Arabia belong to a handful of families and ditto Qatar and the other places? Why should it not belong to Syrians and Egyptians and everybody in that whole general area? Because the West cut it up and carved it that way. So as long as they can keep uh, Israel the dominant force in the area, it's happy times. But unfortunately for those happy times, it's these ordinary Alawites, Armenians, Christians, Sunnis, Shias have to pay the price of all of that. You know, the old Roman thing of divide and conquer uh, still works, as does the supremacist approach that NATO and its Israeli and Turkish sidekicks use.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Israel's the attack dog for Western imperialism. It threatens everyone in the region with violence or under the threat of violence. So it acts on behalf, in my opinion, of Western imperialism, and then it has its own agenda, which is the Greater Israeli
Of
Project.
course,
So
yeah.
we'll threaten everyone in the region so long as you allow us to create a Greater Israel. So we're going to wrap up. Anything you want to say, just in conclusion, any important points you think you'd like to add?
No, well, again, like I've been to Israel twice. I got shot in the back by the Israelis
Oh,
army for my trouble with some incendiary device, and I got bottled by by some London Jews who dropped a bottle on my head because I told them one or two home truths
truths.
very politely. I have to say. But the problem is, see, we can talk here forever about this, but the mainstream media, the politicians, they don't allow any of that. There was another slaughter in Gaza there, where they shot up uh, a bunch of ambulances and then buried the ambulances and the people inside them. Now, the likes of you would be expecting that. That's no big deal for you. That's what the Israelis do. They have a history of doing that. But the BBC and the rest of them have to cover all of that up, and not just the BBC. The tentacles go in all directions, and the end result of all those lies from the BBC, from the Irish equivalent, from the Americans, is that the killing goes on and will go on until Israel, America, and all their tentacles are neutralized. And you take that to its conclusion, and there's fireworks ahead.
Revolution is in the air, otherwise there'll be no change. Dr. Declan Hayes from Dublin, Ireland, thank you very much. I hope to get speaking to you again in the future, brother. Thank you.
Okay. See you then. Bye bye.